Hello everyone, and welcome to this new tutorial, which will be the last of this first chapter. Indeed, we know now how to control the view. We know how to transform objects. We know what 90% of these tools are used for, and we saw what the properties editor allows us to do. So, we only miss one last tool to know, the editor of this area called the outliner. So by simply observing what we have in the editor, we see that it looks a bit like a file explorer with a list of items, folders, subfolders, and we can even expand an item, which gives access to other lists. And if we click on one of the items in the list, without much surprise, this will select an object from our scene. So the list contained in the outliner is simply the list of the whole objects in our scene, and this list allows us to do several things. So as we just saw, we can quickly select different objects from the list, but we can also use the outliner to show or hide objects. So it happens in the right column, with a little pictogram that looks like an eye. If you click on the eye, you disable object visibility. And you can re-enable visibility by clicking on the eye again. You can also freeze an object, which means keeping the object visible while preventing it from being selected. To do that, we first need to activate the icon by going in the filter menu and activate the little arrow here, the one called selectable. I call this option freeze because I come from 3ds Max where this option is called freeze, but in Blender it's called selectable. So now, in the right column, we can see the little selectable icon for each object in the list. So for example, if I want to select some elements of the warrior without being bothered by the base, well, I can simply freeze the elements of the base. So I start with the base itself, then the rocks, and we will even freeze the armature, which should also bother us. And now with the select box, I can select all the elements of the foot without selecting the elements of the base. So obviously, to use the outliner effectively, it is necessary to be able to identify items with an appropriate name. Because there, if I want to know which object of the scene corresponds to which element of the list, I am a little lost. None names of each items doesn't really make sense. So what we are going to do is, for example, rename one element of the right foot. Let's say the right foot toes. Let's first hide the base elements using the outliner, so that we can see more clearly. And now I can select the right toes in the 3D viewport. Then we can go to the Object Properties tab in Properties Editor, and in this field I can rename the object. We will call it Warrior. To know that this element belongs to the Necron Warrior, then we will add _01. In case we have several warriors in our scene, it is better to number each parts. Then _toes, to know that it's the toes, and finally, .r, to know that it's the right foot toes. And there you go. You can also rename an object directly from the outliner. We'll do that with the left foot toes to show you. Before that, I'm going to see where the object is in the list. Here, so there we have our right toes, and left foot toes are here. To rename the object, we simply double-click, and we can rename our object Warrior _01 _toes .l, because now it's left toes. So now, if I want to select one of the toes, I just have to click on the corresponding element of the list, and I know it is the object I'm looking for, since it is named correctly. So what I'm going to do is correctly rename all the objects of the scene from my side, and we're back. Now! So now we have all our objects named correctly. And so we will be able to find each object of the warrior in the outliner. For example, if I want to select, let's say the right hand index first bone, which should be around here, well, I can easily fetch the element called Warrior 01, index 01.r, and select it with the outliner. We could also make multiple selections by using the Control key to add different elements to the selection. So for example, I can complete the selection of the index by checking the second bone of the right index, as well as the third. And we could also complete the selection of fingers by checking the middle finger, the first bone, the second bone, and the third bone, and so on. Now let's see how to use the outliner even more efficiently by using the small folders we can see here, and which are called collections in this software. First, let's create a new collection, either with a right-click by choosing New Collection or by clicking on this little icon. So a new collection has been added, and normally it should be at the bottom of the list. Here it is, it's collection 4. So let's say this collection will gather all the elements of the right hand. So we rename the collection with a double click, and we call it warrior_01_hand.r, and we'll put all objects of the hand there. So let's select the right hand, then all the elements of the right index finger, all the elements of the middle finger of the right hand, the little finger, the ring finger here, and the thumb there. We now have all our objects selected, so we can drag them into the collection we just created, a bit like using the Windows Explorer or the macOS Finder. You can also move objects to a collection using the 3D viewport. So we're going to do the same thing we just did but for the left hand. So first we create a new collection, which is going to end up at the bottom. And we rename it warrior_01_hand.l, and then we will select the objects from the 3D viewport. For example, with the select box, so as we have seen, we take pretty much what we want like that, and then we remove what we don't want with the Control key. So here we have our selection, and we can go to the Object menu, Collection, Move to Collection, or directly with the M key. Then we choose to move our selection to the collection called warriors01hand.l, and objects of the selection will move into our new collection. You can also create a collection directly from the Move to Collection tool. To illustrate that, let's say that we want to create a collection for the right leg. So we select all elements, the upper part, the lower part, and the tibia. Then I press the M key, but I will no longer choose an already existing collection, but the New Collection option. It will create a new collection I can directly name warrior_01_leg.r. I validate, and now I have a new collection containing the 3 elements of the leg. Thanks to the collections that we have just created, we can interact with several objects at the same time. For example, if I want to hide the whole right leg, instead of hiding the objects one by one this way, I will simply hide the whole collection. We can also freeze a collection. For example, I can freeze the elements of the right hand, which allows me, for example, to select the Gauss Reaper in a very efficient way without adding the elements of the right hand to the selection. Finally, you can also select all the objects of a collection with a single click. For example, if we want to select all the objects of the left hand, we can do a right-click on the collection and choose Select Objects. All the objects contained in the collection will be selected. This kind of trick allows us to save a lot of time. For example, let's say we want to work on this hand. Well, I can isolate it very quickly. A right-click, then I choose Select Objects, and then I isolate the selection with the / key. So now I can work on the hand without being disturbed by other objects of the scene. So I'm going to sort all the objects in several collections, and we meet again. Now! So this is how a tidy scene looks like in the outliner. We have a parent collection that brings together all the elements of the warrior, and then we have subcollections. So here I created a collection for the upper parts and a collection for the lower parts of the warrior. And in each subcollection we have sub-subcollections for each element of the mini's anatomy. We have the right arm, which can be quickly selected like that. We have the left arm, the torso, etc. The advantage of such an organization is that we can hide or display our collections very quickly. For example, if I want to hide the entire lower part, I just have to hide the warrior's 0-1 down collection. I can also hide the weapons, and if I don't want the head anymore, I hide the collection of the head, etc. You can even very quickly delete a collection and everything it contains in just 2 clicks. For example, all the elements of the torso, I right-click and I choose Delete Hierarchy. Well, I'm going to immediately undo what I just did because I don't want to delete anything at all. So here's what the outliner allows you to do. A little tip, by the way, there are shortkeys to hide or unhide objects directly from 3D viewport. Let's say you want to hide an object from the Gauss flare. Well, you select it, and with the H key you hide it. You can hide as many as you want. And when you're done, you can unhide all hidden objects with Alt-H. I think we've covered the main use of the outliner. I'll continue to explain other aspects for the bravest of you, but with what we've seen so far, it will be more than enough to move on to the next chapter. So let's continue by looking at the small icons that can be found on either side of each item of the list. The first icon tells us the type of object. So for example, here the orange triangle tells us that the object type is mesh. A project can contain different types of object. Here we have another type, a little orange man, which indicates that this object is an armature. And if we click on the icon, it automatically opens the object properties in the properties editor. The second icon that we will find here, for instance, so the little green triangle, is a little more complex to explain, but I will try to make you understand. Basically in Blender, an object is like an empty shell. It only contains location values on each axis, rotation values on each axis, as well as scale values. We also have relationship setup, visibility options, display options, etc. This is all an object is, and all these properties are collected in the Object Properties tab here. But on the other hand, the purpose of an object is to receive what we call data. So here our head object hosts a data mesh type, represented by the little green triangle. And concretely, what is a mesh data? I'm going to display the wireframes, so we can visualize mesh datas. It's a set of points that form segments between them. The segments form faces between them, and each face between them forms our geometry. The data properties are in the Object Data Properties tab, and if you want to access them quickly, you just have to click on the little green triangle. Any data is hosted inside an object, which means that the data inherits all object properties we can find in this tab. Location values on each axis, as well as rotation and scale, visibility options, display options, etc., all properties specifics to the host object. Let's talk about another type of icons we can see, and we will take the example of the Gauss flare with the bayonet object. We can see a small icon here just before the data icon that looks like a blue wrench. Well, actually, this icon tells us that this object has a modifier, and if I click on the blue wrench, I open the modifier tab of the property editor. And you can see that I have a mirror modifier, and if I disable the modifier, it reveals that in fact I only modeled half of this object. The other half is generated by mirror modifier. So, we have gone very far in explaining the outliner. So we are going to conclude this first chapter. Thank you for having followed it. And I hope that now, when you open Blender, you no longer feel alone in terra incognita. In the next chapter, we will still covering other technical aspects before attacking the manipulation of a rig, but in the meantime, I think I will do a little interlude where we will start creating objects, just to manipulate a little bit, and do things a little bit nicer. See you soon.